Lonely widower mayor asked his son to pick a stepmother among the socialites, but he chose the Café Waitress. Crystal light dripped from the chandeliers. It caught on diamonds. It shimmered over glasses of champagne. The mayor's plan was simple. His son would choose a new mother from the most elegant women in Windermere. But then, like a stone-breaking glass, Jamie bolted. He dashed past silk gowns, straight toward a young woman in a coffee-stained apron. She froze mid-step. A tray trembled in her hands. Steam curled from two porcelain cups. Gasps rippled through the room. Jamie wrapped his arms around her waist. "I want Miss Clara to be my mom," he said. And in that single moment, silk and pearls meant nothing. The quiet order of the town began to unravel. Crystal light dripped from the chandeliers. It caught on diamonds. It shimmered over glasses of champagne. The mayor's plan was simple. His son would choose a new mother from the most elegant women in Windermere. But then, like a stone-breaking glass, Jamie bolted. He dashed past silk gowns, straight toward a young woman in a coffee-stained apron. She froze mid-step. A tray trembled in her hands. Steam curled from two porcelain cups. Gasps rippled through the room. Jamie wrapped his arms around her waist. "I want Miss Clara to be my mum," he said. And in that single moment, silk and pearls meant nothing. The quiet order of the town began to unravel. Elias Carrington's jaw tightened. He could feel every eye on him watching, waiting to see how the mayor of Windermere would react. The women in jeweled gowns exchanged glances, their painted smiles turning brittle. They knew exactly who Clara Bennett was, the girl who worked at Seaside Brews, the one who refilled coffee for fishermen at dawn. Not the sort of woman you brought into a mayor's family. Elias stepped forward. "Jamie," he said softly, "why don't you come back here, son?" Jamie only clung tighter. "She saved Buster." His voice was loud enough to carry across the marble hall. "Last week. Remember? He ran into the street. She picked him up before the car hit him." Clara's cheeks burned. She looked from the boy to his father, her lips parting to explain, to apologize, to something. But nothing came out. She had only come here to deliver a special coffee order, 2 cappuccinos for the mayor's guests. No one told her she'd be walking into a hall full of high society. No one warned her that a 9-year-old would suddenly decide she should be his mother. "Miss Clara, is it?" Elias asked, his voice measured, polite, the way he spoke to strangers in public meetings. "Yes, sir," she managed. Her voice was low, careful. She felt the stares prickling her skin like tiny needles. Elias's gaze lingered for a beat too long. She noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into the sun during long speeches, or maybe from years of holding back emotion. But now his eyes were unreadable. "Thank you for helping my son last week," he said. "You've done us a kindness." She nodded quickly, eager to step back to fade from the scene. But Jamie wouldn't let go. "Can she stay, Dad? Just for tonight, please." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the women, a tall blonde in emerald silk, leaned toward another and whispered something. The other laughed behind her wineglass. Clara's pulse hammered. She hated being the center of attention. In her cafe, she could disappear into the hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of cinnamon scones. Here, every breath felt too loud. "I think Miss Clara has work to get back to," Elias said. His tone was kind enough but final. Jamie's lower lip trembled. "I don't like anyone else here," he muttered. "Jamie," Elias warned. The boy let go reluctantly, but as Clara stepped away, he caught her hand. "You'll come see me again, right?" She hesitated. She could feel every pair of eyes still on her. Sure," she said softly. She didn't know why she agreed. Elias inclined his head in thanks and took the coffee tray from her. The warmth seeped into his hands, but his thoughts were elsewhere. When Clara finally escaped through the double doors, she exhaled hard. Her car was parked 3 blocks away. She'd have to walk past the harbor where the salty wind might finally clear her head. Inside, the party continued. Or at least it tried to, but every now and then Elias caught someone glancing toward the door Clara had exited. His sister Margaret, elegant in navy chiffon, slid up beside him. "Well," she murmured, "that wasn't in your plan." "Plans change," Elias said. keeping his eyes on Jamie, who now sulked near the refreshment table. Margaret tilted her head. She's pretty, in an unpolished way. She's a waitress. Margaret smiled faintly, and Elias didn't answer. But something about the way Clara had looked at him, nervous yet steady, lingered. The next morning, Clara was back at Seaside Brews by 6. The cafe was small, 5 tables a counter, and an ancient espresso machine that coughed before it brewed. The smell of ground beans filled the air, warm and earthy, blending with the faint scent of the ocean drifting through the open door. Her younger sister Lila wiped down the tables. "Sheared about last night," Lila said casually, though her eyes were sharp. "Whole town's talking." Clara groaned. "Fantastic. They're saying the mayor's kid wants you as his mum." Clara shot her a look. "That's exactly what happened." Lila grinned. "Kind of a fairy tale, huh?" Clara poured milk into the steaming pitcher, the hiss masking her sigh. More like a misunderstanding. But deep down, she wasn't sure why she'd promised Jamie she'd visit. 2 days later, the mayor's driver appeared at the cafe. He handed her a sealed envelope, an invitation for tea at the Carrington mansion. Jamie had requested her presence. Clara stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. She told herself she was too busy, that it wasn't her world. But when she saw Jamie's uneven handwriting on the back, "Please come, Miss Clara," she knew she would go. What she didn't know was that stepping through those doors again would be the first thread pulled from a fabric Elias had spent years keeping perfectly woven. Clara arrived at the Carrington mansion on a Thursday afternoon, when the harbour wind carried a sharp bite. She debated turning back twice on the short walk from where the driver had dropped her off at the gate. The mansion's pale stone walls loomed ahead, catching the late sun in a golden wash. Her own reflection looked small and out of place in the glossy black doors. A housekeeper opened them before she could knock. "Miss Bennet," the woman said, her smile polite but guarded. "This way, please." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Her boots clicked on the marble floor as she followed through the hallway past oil portraits of stern-faced Carrington ancestors. Jamie was already waiting in the parlour, perched on a deep green sofa like he couldn't sit still. When he saw her, he jumped up and nearly tripped over the coffee table in his rush to greet her. "You came," he said, grinning wide. "Dad said you might be busy, but I knew you'd come." Clara laughed softly. "Wouldn't miss it." Elias entered then, carrying a tray with tea and a plate of scones. He looked different in the daylight. Less imposing, without the chandelier glow, but still every inch the mare dark hair neatly combed. Shirt sleeves rolled up just enough to show forearms dusted with faint scars from old forgotten work. "Miss Bennet," he greeted. His voice was polite but warmer than before. "Thank you for accepting our unconventional invitation." Clara glanced at Jamie. It seemed important to someone. Jamie beamed. They sat together. Elias poured tea with practiced care, his movements deliberate, controlled. Jamie chattered about school, about Buster's latest mischief, about the seagull that stole his sandwich last weekend. Clara noticed Elias watching her when Jamie spoke quietly, studying as if trying to understand something he couldn't quite name. When Jamie ran upstairs to get the puppy, Elias leaned back slightly. "I should apologize for the other night," he said. "I imagine it was uncomfortable." Clara smiled faintly. "That's one word for it. I didn't mean to make you feel out of place." His tone was steady, but there was a flicker of sincerity in his eyes. "You didn't," she said, though it wasn't entirely true. "I just wasn't expecting to be in a room like that. You handled it better than most would." She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a test. Either way, she let it pass. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself back at the mansion more than she expected. Jamie insisted on it, inviting her for tea, for board games, for walks along the pier, with Buster bounding ahead. Elias rarely spoke about himself, but Clara began to learn things in pieces. How his wife Anna had passed away 3 years ago from an illness that stole her voice before her strength. How he'd thrown himself into work afterward because silence at home was harder than endless council meetings. Once during a rainy afternoon, she found him in the study surrounded by stacks of papers. "You work even on weekends?" she asked lightly. "Winmere doesn't stop," he replied, glancing up with a faint smile. Neither can I. There was no self-pity in his voice, just quiet duty. Outside the Carrington world, Clara's own life was fraying at the edges. Her cafe, Seaside Brews, was losing customers fast to the shiny new chain that had opened 3 blocks away. They had bright signs, aggressive discounts, and a marketing budget she couldn't imagine. She'd cut her own hours of sleep to keep the place afloat, often working until close, then waking before dawn to start the ovens. Lila helped as much as she could, but her sister still had college classes to attend. Clara never mentioned these struggles to Elias or Jamie. It felt wrong to bring her problems into their home, especially when Jamie's visits were the only part of her week untouched by worry. But one evening, as she walked Jamie back from the pier, Elias joined them. "You look tired," he said quietly. She laughed it off. "Occupational hazard. You're not just working. You're carrying something," he observed. It wasn't a question. Clara hesitated. She could have brushed it aside again, but something in his tone, calm, certain, made her admit, "Business isn't great right now. The new coffee chain's been tough to compete with." He nodded slowly. "I've seen it happen before. They move in fast." "It's fine," she said quickly. "We'll manage." But that night, long after she'd gone, Elias found himself thinking about the weight in her voice when she'd said it. The undercurrent of judgment from the town's elite didn't fade. One afternoon, Clara stopped by the local market, only to overhear 2 women from the mayor's gathering whispering near the flower stand. "Don't know what the boy sees in her. Pity, maybe. She's sweet, but she's not a Carrington." Clara pretended not to hear, but the words clung to her all the way back to the cafe. That evening, Lila caught her staring at the till for too long. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" Clara shook her head. "No. I'm thinking about how to pay the supplier next month." But it wasn't entirely true. One Sunday morning, Jamie bounded into the cafe with Buster in tow. Elias followed more slowly, a hand resting in his coat pocket. "This is where you work?" Jamie asked, eyes wide as he took in the chalkboard menu, the worn wooden tables. Clara smiled. "This is it." Elias glanced around, noting the nearly empty room, despite the rich smell of fresh coffee and pastries. He didn't say anything about it, not then. Instead, he ordered 2 cappuccinos, sat with his son, and listened to Jamie ask Clara a dozen questions about the espresso machine. It was a small thing, but she noticed how Elias's eyes softened when he saw Jamie laughing with her. And for the first time, she wondered if he was beginning to see her differently. 2 weeks later, Clara was wiping down the counter at Seaside Brews when the bell above the door jingled. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his coat. He didn't belong here, that much was obvious from the way his polished shoes clicked against the floor, and his eyes scanned the cafe like it was a business deal waiting to happen. "Miss Bennet?" he asked. Clara straightened. "Yes." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name's Martin Rourke. I represent a group of investors interested in your property." She frowned. "It's not for sale." "Of course," he said smoothly, "but I think you'll want to hear our offer. It's generous." When he slid the envelope across the counter, Clara hesitated before opening it. The number printed there made her blink. It was higher than she'd expected, but still far less than the cafe was worth, especially considering the years she'd poured into it. "I'm not interested," she said, pushing it back. His smile thinned. "You might want to reconsider. Chains like Brew Hub are expanding fast. You'll be losing more customers every month. Better to leave on your own terms." Something in his tone made her skin prickle. "Thank you, but no," she said firmly. He picked up the envelope, tucked it back into his coat, and left without another word. That night, Lila found Clara still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. "What happened?" her sister asked. "Someone tried to buy the cafe." "For less than it's worth." Lila frowned. "Why would they think you'd sell?" Clara thought about the empty seats, the bills stacked in the drawer, the long hours catching up to her. "Because they think I'm desperate." The next afternoon, Clara saw Martin Rourke again, this time, in the company of a man she recognized from the local paper. Harold Sutter, one of Elias Carrington's loudest political rivals. They were leaning against a black sedan across from the cafe, deep in conversation. When she stepped outside to take out the trash, both men glanced her way before looking back at each other. Her stomach knotted. This wasn't just business. It felt like something else, something calculated. 2 days later, Jamie appeared at the cafe with a worried look. "Dad says you're having trouble with the shop," he blurted, as if afraid she might deny it. Clara crouched to his level. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "But I do," Jamie insisted, "because you're my friend. And?" His voice softened. "I don't want you to go away." Before she could answer, Elias stepped in behind him. He'd clearly heard enough. "Jamie," he said, "why don't you see if Buster wants a walk? I'll talk to Miss Clara." The boy nodded reluctantly and left. Elias waited until the door closed before speaking. "Martin Rourke," he said. "You met him?" "Yes, he made me an offer. I said no." "Good. Don't take it." Clara crossed her arms. "I wasn't planning to. But why do I get the feeling you know more about this than you're saying?" Elias's jaw worked for a moment. "Because I do. Rourke is tied to Harold Sutter. If they can pressure you into selling, Sutter will use it as proof that I don't protect small businesses. It's a political move. So my cafe is just a pawn in your game?" she asked, heat rising in her voice. His gaze sharpened. "No, you're caught in the crossfire." "There's a difference?" She exhaled slowly, forcing her anger down. "So what do I do?" "Hold your ground," he said. "I'll see if I can find you some help." Help came in the form of an introduction. A week later, Elias brought a man named Daniel Hartley to the cafe, a restaurateur who owned the most successful dining chain in the region. He was tall, genial, and clearly charmed by Clara's homemade scones. "I like places with heart," Hartley said, leaning back in his chair. "You've got that here. I could partner with you. Help renovate, expand. Maybe get your own beans roasted locally." Clara hesitated. "I appreciate it, but I can't afford a partner like you." Hartley smiled. "That's the thing. I don't want to own your cafe. I want to invest in it. You'd keep control." She glanced at Elias, who gave a faint nod. "Think about it," Hartley added. "Just don't take too long. Good offers don't stay on the table forever." That night, Clara lay awake, weighing her choices. Partnering with Hartley could save the cafe, but it also meant stepping into a larger world of business she didn't fully understand. On the other hand, refusing him might leave her vulnerable to people like Rourke. In the end, the decision came down to something simpler. She wanted to keep what her parents had built. The next morning she called Hartley. "I'm in," she said. The renovation began within the month. New paint in warm coastal hues, refinished tables, brighter lighting that made the pastries gleam in their cases. Word spread fast. Seaside Brews was back better than ever. The first Saturday after reopening the line stretched down the block. Clara moved behind the counter with practiced ease, the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine wrapping around her like a heartbeat. From a corner table, Elias watched quietly as Jamie helped wipe down chairs between customers. There was pride in his eyes, but something else too, something that flickered every time Clara laughed at a customer's joke or leaned over the counter to hand Jamie a cookie. But the chain cafe 3 blocks away didn't take the loss lightly. Within weeks, they started slashing prices, plastering posters around town, even hiring a local influencer to promote them. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she added new seasonal drinks, partnered with local bakers, and hosted weekly open mic nights. People came not just for the coffee, but for the warmth, and slowly the tide began to turn. What she didn't know was that Sutter's camp was watching closely, and they didn't intend to lose quietly. It started small. A supplier's delivery was mysteriously delayed. A city inspector showed up unannounced, citing minor infractions Clara had never been warned about before. Then one night, someone smashed one of the front windows. Jamie was the first to see it the next morning. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the jagged hole in the glass. "Miss Clara," he whispered. "Who would do this?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know, sweetheart." But she had a guess. Elias arrived minutes later, his expression grim. "Looks like we've got a problem," he said, glancing at the damage. "I'll send someone to fix this." Clara shook her head. "I can handle it." "Clara," he said quietly, "this isn't just about a window. They're trying to rattle you." "I'm not going to let them," she replied, though her voice wavered. 2 nights later, she heard footsteps outside the cafe after closing. Peeking through the blinds, she saw two men in dark hoodies slipping something into the mailbox. By the time she got outside, they were gone. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. No words, just a printed photograph of her locking up the cafe the previous evening. Her hands went cold. The next morning, Elias showed up before opening hours. "You should have told me sooner," he said when she handed him the photo. "I didn't want to drag you into it again," she said. "You didn't drag me," he replied. "They did." He made calls quiet, quick, efficient. Within days, the harassment stopped. The supplier's schedule returned to normal. The inspector didn't come back. The men in hoodies were never seen again. But the undercurrent of tension remained. One Saturday evening, Clara was wiping down tables after the open mic night when she felt someone behind her. She turned to find Elias, his tie loosened, a faint weariness in his eyes. "You've been busy," she said, nodding toward the still crowded cafe. "So have you," he said. "You've handled this better than most people I know." She smiled faintly. "I didn't really have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," he said. "Most people just choose the easy way out." Their eyes met for a beat too long. "Clara," he began, then stopped as Jamie bounded over with a guitar pick in hand. "Dad, Miss Clara, did you hear me play?" I heard every note she said, crouching to his level. "And you were wonderful." Jamie beamed, then tugged on Elias's hand. "Can we take Miss Clara to the pier tomorrow?" Elias hesitated. "That depends on Miss Clara." She hesitated too, then nodded. "Sure, I'd like that." The next afternoon, the three of them walked along the boardwalk, the sea wind tangling Clara's hair and sending gulls wheeling overhead. Jamie ran ahead, chasing the waves. Elias slowed his pace beside her. "You've become important to him," he said. She glanced at him. "And to you?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I'm not sure when it happened, but yes." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She opened her mouth to reply, but Jamie's shout carried over the surf, breaking the moment. "Come see, there's a seal." They spent the afternoon by the water, and for a few hours the world felt simple again. But as the sun sank behind the horizon, Elias's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, and Clara caught only fragments: Sutter's name, the words "next debate," and a mention of the cafe. When he returned, his face was carefully neutral. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing that can't wait," he said. But she knew better, and somewhere deep down she sensed the battle wasn't over. It had only changed shape. The mayoral debate was held in the grand hall of the town library. Rows of chairs were packed, cameras lined the back, and the air was thick with murmurs. Clara slipped into the last row, her hands knotted in her lap. She hadn't planned to come until Jamie begged her to. On stage, Elias sat at one podium. At the other, his opponent, Martin Sutter, smiled like a man already measuring the curtains for his new office. The moderator began with the usual questions: tax budgets, infrastructure plans for the harbor. Elias's answers were steady, deliberate. Sutter's were slick, rehearsed. Then came the moment Clara had feared. "Mayor Caldwell, the moderator said there have been rumors about your personal life influencing your role in office. Mr. Sutter, you brought this topic forward. Would you like to elaborate?" Sutter leaned into his microphone. "Yes, the mayor has been distracted. We've all seen it. A widower suddenly spending his evenings in a cafe, prioritizing certain relationships over his duties. The voters deserve to know, does this woman have undue influence over our mayor?" Gasps broke out. Cameras clicked like machine guns. Clara's cheeks burned. She felt every eye in the hall swing toward her. Jamie's small hand slipped into hers. "Miss Clara," he whispered, "don't leave." On stage, Elias's jaw tightened. He leaned forward. "She has no influence on my policies," he said evenly, "but she has had an influence on me, on my life, and I won't apologize for that." Sutter laughed. "So you admit it. The mayor's heart is elsewhere while the town's business suffers." "No," Elias said, his voice rising just enough to cut through the room. "I admit that after years of loneliness, I found someone who reminds me what this job is really for. This town isn't built on budgets and votes, it's built on people, and she's one of the best people I've met." The hall went silent. Then unexpectedly, applause began in the middle rows and rolled outward like a wave. Sutter's smile faltered. He tried to steer the conversation back to policy, but the energy had shifted. The rest of the debate was no longer his stage, it belonged to Elias. Afterward, as the crowd spilled into the night air, Clara lingered in the shadows. She hadn't spoken to Elias yet, unsure if she wanted to thank him or scold him for making her a target again. But then he appeared at the library steps, Jamie perched on his hip. He looked straight at her. "Walk home with us," he asked. And despite the stares, the whispers, the cameras still flashing, she found herself saying yes. The morning after the debate, Windermere was buzzing. Newspapers splashed the same photo on their front pages, Elias at the podium, chin lifted, defending Clara. Online comments flared like sparks in dry grass. Half the town praised him for being honest. The other half accused him of losing his judgment. Clara kept the cafe closed that day. She scrubbed the counters, rearranged the sugar jars, anything to drown out the thought that somewhere someone was dissecting her life over breakfast. The doorbell chimed anyway. She froze, cloth in hand. Elias stepped in. Jamie bounded past him, racing to the counter. "You didn't open," Elias said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," Clara whispered. "They'll think." "They already think," he interrupted. "Let me help you weather it." But before she could answer, the door opened again. Martin Sutter walked in. His smile was as smooth as his tailored suit, but his eyes were cold. "Miss Clara," he said, "I hear you've been quite the topic lately. I'd like a word. Alone." Elias moved between them. "You've said enough in public, Martin. You won't harass her here." Sutter's smirk deepened. "Oh, I'm not here to harass. I'm here to offer a warning. The past has a way of coming back, Mayor, especially when it involves theft." Clara's stomach dropped. Her fingers tightened around the rag until her knuckles blanched. Elias turned to her, confusion in his eyes. "Clara." Sutter tipped his hat and left the bell jingling cheerfully behind him. Silence swallowed the cafe. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I never told you. And if he's digging, you'll know soon enough." Elias reached across the counter. "Then tell me now." But before she could, Jamie tugged at his sleeve, pointing out the window. Across the street, a man with a camera was snapping photos of them. It was clear whatever storm Sutter was brewing, it had already begun. That night, rain lashed against the cafe windows. Clara sat at the corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Elias sat across from her, sleeves rolled, his gaze steady. Jamie was asleep upstairs. There would be no interruptions this time. Clara took a breath that felt like it scraped her lungs. 3 years ago, I worked at a small boutique outside Windermere. The owner treated the staff terribly late, pay impossible quotas, cutting hours without warning. I wanted to leave, but I had no savings. Then, one night after we closed, the register was short by $200. She stared at her hands. He said I stole it. I didn't. But he called the police. There wasn't enough proof to charge me, but I was fired, and in this town that's enough to brand you. Elias leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I know how people look at someone with that kind of rumor attached," she whispered. "And I thought, if you knew, you might look at me that way too." Elias's jaw tightened, but not at her. "At least now I know what Sutter thinks he has. He'll use it to paint you as a criminal, and me as a fool for defending you." She shook her head. "I can handle people whispering about me, but if this costs you the election—" "Clara." His voice was firm now. "I'd rather lose an election than lose you." Before she could answer, a sharp rap came at the cafe door. Elias turned, frowning. On the other side of the glass stood a soaked teenager clutching a crumpled envelope. Clara unlocked the door. The boy shoved the envelope into her hands. "Some guy paid me $50 to give you this." Elias ripped it open. Inside was a single photograph, grainy black and white, of Clara behind the boutique counter 3 years ago, holding a cash drawer in her hands. On the back, in neat block letters, "Next time the whole town sees this." By Friday morning, the photograph was everywhere. On news blogs, on gossip forums, printed in grainy black and white on the front page of the Windermere Chronicle. The headline screamed, "Mayor's Companion, Tied to Unsolved Theft Case." Clara couldn't leave the apartment above the cafe without feeling eyes on her. People she'd served coffee to for years now crossed the street to avoid her. Someone had scrawled thief in chalk on the cafe's back door. Elias came to her that afternoon, his tie loose, his expression thunderous. It was Sutter. He's pushing the story to every paper and blog in the state. I told you, Clara murmured. This is what happens when you stand next to me. Elias shook his head. This is what happens when a desperate man runs out of honest moves. But desperation could win elections if the opponent stayed quiet. The final mayoral debate was in 3 days, and Sutter would use that stage to repeat the accusation to every household in Windermere. That night, Elias sat in his study campaign notes scattered across the desk. Jamie padded in, clutching a stuffed fox. Dad, they were talking about Clara on the playground. They said she's bad. Elias pulled his son into his lap. She's not bad. She's the best person I've ever met. Jamie frowned. Then you have to tell everyone. All at once. So they know, too. Elias stared at the boy, a plan forming. He would tell everyone, but not with speeches or press releases. He would give them proof. And to get that proof, he would have to return to the boutique where it all began and dig up the truth Sutter was so afraid of. The old boutique sat on the edge of town, its once pink awning faded to a sickly grey. Elias parked his truck across the street, rain ticking against the windshield. Inside, the air smelled of dust and cheap perfume. Behind the counter stood Harold Greeley, same pinched face, same sharp little eyes. Well, well, Harold said, leaning on the counter. The mayor himself, here to buy something for his lady friend. Elias ignored the jab. I'm here about the night of June 14th, 3 years ago. The night you accused Clara Whitlow of theft. Harold's smile thinned. That's old news. Best let it lie. Not when a man's spreading a lie to win an election, Elias said, his voice dropping low. I want to see the security footage from that night. Harold barked a laugh. Footage. Tapes get wiped every month. And even if I had them, why would I hand them over? Elias stepped closer. Because if you don't, I'll have the county inspectors go through every inch of this place. And if they find what I think they will, you'll be the one in the papers. For the first time, Harold's gaze wavered. After a long pause, he bent down, unlocked a drawer, and slid a dusty USB drive across the counter. Back in his truck, Elias plugged it into his laptop. The footage played in grainy color. Clara closing the register, counting bills, setting the drawer on the counter before walking away to answer the phone. Moments later, Harold himself stepped into frame, opened the drawer, and slid several bills into his jacket pocket. Elias's jaw tightened. It wasn't just proof, it was the bullet that could end Sutter's campaign smear for good. He closed the laptop and started the engine. 3 days until the final debate. 3 days to turn the tide. And this time, Elias wasn't just going to defend Clara's name. He was going to burn Sutter's lies to the ground. The town hall was packed. Every seat filled the air thick with anticipation. Television cameras lined the back wall, red lights glowing like watchful eyes. Outside, rain hammered the roof, as if trying to drown out what was about to happen. Sutter opened the debate with that smug smile Elias knew too well. And before we discuss policy, he said the people of Windermere deserve to know who their mayor keeps company with. A woman with a criminal history. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara, seated in the front row, kept her chin high, but her hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Elias waited for the moderator's nod before speaking. Mr. Sutter, he said evenly, you've told this story enough times. Now it's time the people see the truth. He lifted a small projector remote. The screen behind them flickered to life grainy footage from a boutique. The crowd watched as Clara closed the register, answered the phone, and then Harold Greeley stepped into frame, taking the money himself. Murmurs turned to shouts. Someone yelled, "That's Harold." Another voice rose. He works with Sutter's brother. Elias's voice cut through the noise. For 3 years, this lie has been used to smear an innocent woman. Tonight, I'm ending it. Clara Whitlow is not a thief. She is a part of this community. She is the person my son trusts, and the person I trust with my life. The applause started in the back, then rolled forward like a wave. Sutter tried to speak, but his words were swallowed by the uproar. The cameras caught every second the fury in the audience, the mayor standing tall and the man across from him shrinking in his chair. Clara felt Jamie slip his hand into hers. "Told you, Mum," he whispered. "They just needed to hear it." Election night painted Windermere in gold and silver lights. Downtown buzzed with voices spilling from pubs, cafes, and the steps of City Hall. Inside the mayor's campaign headquarters, the air smelled of coffee, rain-soaked coats, and barely contained hope. When the final count flashed on the screen, Elias Harrow, 62%, Sutter Kane, 37%, the room erupted. Volunteers shouted, hugged, and clapped each other on the back. Elias's eyes found Clara across the room. She wasn't cheering. She was just watching him, tears shining but unshed. He crossed to her through the chaos, stopping only when they were inches apart. "This isn't just my win," he said quietly. "It's yours. And Jamie's." She smiled, small but steady. "I didn't run for office, Elias." "No," he said, taking her hand, "but you fought for the truth. And that's harder than politics." Jamie barreled between them, laughing, arms thrown around both their waists. The three of them stood there in the middle of the noise like a little island of calm. Outside Windermere's clock tower struck midnight, and for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel the weight of the empty space beside him, because it wasn't empty anymore. Sometimes the people who change our lives aren't the ones who arrive with grand gestures, but the ones who quietly stay even when it's not easy. Have you ever met someone who turned your world around just by being there? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this chapter touched, you consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on the little bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for sharing this moment with me, and until we meet again, take care of your heart.